welcome. Today we have special guest Joseph Lewis. Joseph has written 6 books, Taking Lives, Stolen Lives, Shattered Lives, and Splintered Lives that make up the Lives trilogy and prequel, Caught in a Web, and now Spiral into Darkness. Caught in a Web was named a PennCraft Literary Award winner for crime fiction, and Best Thrillers named it one of 2018's best crime thrillers of the year. He uses his psychology and counseling background along with his experience and education to craft his characters and storylines. Lewis has been in education for 42 years and counting as a teacher, coach, counselor, and administrator. He is currently a high school principal and resides in Virginia. Welcome, Joseph Lewis.
Thank you. Nice having you. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's an absolute pleasure to have you here. And I'm truly thankful and blessed for the opportunity to be able to interview you. Now, 42 years as an educator, that is absolutely amazing. You know, I thought about going into teaching when I was younger, but how has that been for you? 42 years. You definitely must have had a lot of influence and impact on young kids.
You know, you'd like to think so. There are times, there are days that are better than others, but honestly, I can't think of doing anything different with my life. It's been a real joy. It's been a pleasure. At times it is a struggle, but it is one of the most rewarding professions I think anybody could ever have.
Absolutely agree wholeheartedly. You know, nothing is better than seeing that young person when you're able to mold and shape them and mentor them, coach, teach, train, whatever label you want to put on them, and see them grow and become something greater than themselves. That's an amazing feeling, isn't it?
You know, what's nice and rewarding is that there are so many young adults and older adults that have been former students of mine, colleagues of mine, and that we've stayed in touch over these 42 years. That's kind of gratifying.
I imagine. I know myself, I've stayed in contact with a lot of people that I've had an influence and impact over the years. And that's great when they can come back to you. So have you ever had a student come back to you later on and ask for continued mentorship or guidance?
Yes, regularly. Yes.
That's awesome. That is an awesome feeling right there. So within your education background, have you ever had an opportunity to either institute a writing program or been able to talk to students about writing within over the years?
I've been a regular in our creative writing classes, our English classrooms. Our Lit Mag just this year had a lock-in sleepover, and I was one of the authors that presented on difference between mystery and suspense. I talked a little bit about psychological thriller, and that was very rewarding. That was fun. It was also rather late in the evening, way past my bedtime, but it was fun.
Yeah, it definitely be able to have that type, especially in programs. You know, I know there's a lot of programs and opportunity for programs out there. So, in reference to skills, what would be the number one skill you think that a young writer should master?
I think anybody who's writing, whether young or old or in between, I think they need 2 skills. Number 1, to read, and number 2, to write. I think one goes hand in hand with the other. Stephen King talks about the fact that if you're not reading, you don't acquire the tools in the toolbox to be able to write. And I really wholeheartedly believe that. I think a person needs to read mostly in the genre that they're interested in and that they're writing in, but also outside the genre, because you learn phrases, you learn sentences, you learn vocabulary, you learn the rhythm and the beat of writing. And then you take that and you need to write. And I liken it to an athlete. An athlete doesn't just happen. The athlete works at it. You're in the weight room, you're on the track, you're running, you are performing your particular skill. And to me, reading is to writing as weight training or running is to the athlete. You cannot have one without the other.
I agree wholeheartedly. Writing is a muscle. You know, if you don't use that muscle, it tends to get weaker. Would you agree?
And it atrophies. You bet. It atrophies.
Yeah, so definitely writing is a continued skill. I know myself, I like to, whenever I'm trying to expand my writing, and I like the point that you made about reading. I think that that's very important as well too, not only with reading or writing, but reading. That is an absolutely great point because you get to see how others have done it. It's kind of like mentorship in a book, so to speak.
Yes, yes, good point.
And I believe in paraphrasing. Okay, so when I'm trying to figure something out, I always try to paraphrase from something that I've read. Have you ever used paraphrasing within any of your writing?
Oh, yes, all the time, honestly. Going way back to Tony Hillerman. One of my characters is a kid, a 15-year-old boy, a full-blood Navajo who's from Arizona. And it is reading Tony Hillerman's books, his novels, that kind of gave me the interest in writing, especially that particular character. And Stephen King has so many wonderful lines, James Patterson, Baldacci, John Sanford. And I wouldn't say I am stealing their work, but I am able to paraphrase the way they state things. And I think that adds some richness in writing.
Okay. Who would be your favorite writer then?
There was one, this is rather humbling and it's also kind of scary. I had one reader wrote, if you like James Patterson, you'll love Joseph Lewis. And I mean, he is the God. I bow down to him. And he writes what I call Patterson chapters. His chapters never end cleanly. They blend right into the next chapter to keep the reader moving. And that's what I try to do in my writing. So he's one of my favorites. He's one of my go-to guys. Baldacci is another. Sanford with his Lucas Davenport character. Michael Connelly with his Harry Bosch character. Those are guys that have been at it. They do it, and they're successful at it. And so those are the guys that I would say I look up to and try to learn from.
Okay. What about character? What would be your favorite character?
I like the Alex Cross character in the James Patterson books. I like the John Puller character in the Baldacci novels, Lucas Davenport in Sanford. Of my own, I like my kids. My main characters tend to be adolescents.
Okay.
Part of that is how it's my 42 years in education. I'm around them every day. And so my favorite characters are three: George, the Navajo boy, his adopted brother Brett, and his adopted brother Brian. Those are probably my three favorite characters in my writing.
So within your writing, there's always a lot of opportunity to kind of want to either throw a little bit of yourself within your writing, some of your little isms or things that you like or say or do. Have you ever written yourself as a character in any of your stories?
Not cleanly. There's no pure Joe Lewis in any of my characters. However, there are parts of me in many of them. I think probably the closest to any character that's close to me would be Jeremy Evans, who's a counselor, a former basketball coach, who has adopted 6 boys. He and his wife had 2 of the boys, and now they have a family of 6. And I would say that of the characters, probably Jeremy is the closest to me. Probably the same heart, the same thinking. I might go things a little bit differently than he does. My life is a little bit more boring than his might be, but it's all good.
Yeah. So in reference to writing a plot or story development or even a character, which do you think is more important, plot, story, or character?
Boy, honestly, that is really a great question. Stephen King talks about how he develops his ideas, and what he said is there are 2 separate, unhinged events that occur, and they cause him to think, to ponder, and to write. And I would say that I always start with a story idea. In Caught in the Web, for instance, I was reading the local paper, and on one page was a story about how MS-13 has been creeping down into central and northern Virginia.
Yes.
A couple pages back in that same paper was a story on the opioid epidemic and how adults were dying from it. Two seemingly unrelated storylines, I combined them and Caught in a Web. Because with MS-13, they're running drugs, they're running humans, they're running those kinds of things, guns, drugs, and humans.
Definitely.
And that really is the storyline of Caught in a Web. With Spiral into Darkness, it was a conversation I was having with my psychology teacher about the influence of nature versus nurture. Which one comes first? It's kind of like the chicken and the egg. Yeah. And then I was watching Criminal Minds, and the idea came to me, is a serial killer born, or is there a trigger that causes someone to become a serial killer? That's the basis for a Spiral into Web. So to me, it's the story idea, I think, that I come first, but because I'm so familiar with the characters from the previous books, I just bring them forward like Patterson does with Alex Cross, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So how do you come up with your plots or characters? I know that you touched a little bit about MS-13, you touched about like current events type things. So is that a driving force behind coming up with your plot and your characters? Or do you have any other influences besides current event type stuff?
Well, I weave quite a bit of psychology and quite a bit of counseling into my stories. I tend to have twin or sometimes tri-storylines that crash into each other at the climax. In a couple of my stories, what happens is there's a family storyline. Brett and Bobby are struggling with their biological dad and the relationship that they have with their adoptive dad. And all of that ties in towards the end. Brian is struggling with his family because he had a brother that was killed. He has to deal with that. The family has kind of turned inward. There's no place for him. And yet Jeremy has taken him in and kind of mentored him. So there's these twin stories that collide and collapse at the very end, at the climax. So that's kind of how I build my stories.
Okay. Out of your 6 books, which one is your favorite?
Oh, man. Keith Urban was asked a similar question about how did he pick the stories for his greatest hits album. And his answer was, they're my babies, each one. And it's kind of like you or I with our kids. You don't say that, for me, I don't like Hannah more than Emily or Emily more than Hannah. I don't like Will more than Hannah or Emily. You like them for various reasons, and you like them because of those reasons. And I would say that my first, Stolen Lives, could be my favorite because it was the first one that I had ever written.
Okay.
However, I've had so much fun with the follow-ups to that, Shattered and Splintered Lives, and then with Caught in a Web and Spiral into Darkness. Each one has its own flavor and its own fun about its own love for me.
So what did you like best? I mean, was it a storyline or a plot or a particular character? So I know, like myself, for example, there are certain characters
I kind of lost you a little bit there.
What I asked was which what made your favorite book your favorite? Was it a favorite character or a plot or the storyline?
I think it was the plot and storyline. Okay. When I was a counselor back in 89, 90, I came across an article about Jacob Wetterling, who was a boy from St. Joseph, Minnesota, who was abducted at gunpoint by a stranger in front of his brother and his best friend. And it just hit me. And so I became an educator adjunct for the Wetterling Foundation for Stranger Abducted and Sexually Exploited Kids. And it was through that work that I really wanted to help families and kids reconnect and do what I could to keep kids safe. And when I started having my own children, when Hannah was born, when we adopted Will, I started seeing them as I was speaking about Elizabeth Smart or Johnny Gosch or Eaton Pats. And so I had to kind of step back. But I always knew I wanted to give back to them. And that's really the genesis of the Lives trilogy.
You know, it's absolutely awesome how you kind of weave that together. So within your books, you know, books are powerful. They can send an absolute message out to its readers. So within your books, I know that you hit on a lot of things, especially current events, and I know those current events are really bad type stuff. I mean, I'm familiar with MS-13, opioid epidemic, and this, that, and the other. So what is a message within your book that you're trying to portray? Whether it be positive or negative?
I would say family and relationships. To me, the crux of all of my books are the relationships that the characters have with each other and with themselves. And it's the love that the family has for each other, because it's the strength of the family that can weather all of these different storms.
Okay. All right. If you had one golden nugget that you could share with a young author or even a more seasoned author, what would that one golden nugget be?
I would say that there will always be people who will love your work. Mm-hmm. There will always be people who will hate your work, no matter what you do. And I think if you have the passion to write, you write. And you're writing for yourself, and if it gives birth to other people, that you're fortunate enough to have other people read your work, that's all fine and good. But just remember that there will always be the critic. There will always be people that'll love it or hate it, but you are really writing for yourself to give yourself and others a message. To me, that's why I write. I think that's why other people write as well. It's just fun. To me, it's a passion. It's no longer a job for me.
Yeah. So it's kind of an outlet, kind of a vent for you then.
It's my stress release. Okay. You know, my wife jogs every morning. She goes to CrossFit. I do neither. I have no interest in that. But my stress release is to be able to sit down at my computer and weave these stories and craft the characters and what they're going to say and how they're going to interact. To me, that's my pleasure. That's my passion.
That is absolutely awesome. And it's a great stress relief as well, too.
You bet.
So what's next for you as an author? Do you have a new book coming out, a new series? What are you currently working on?
I am working on a follow-up to Spiral into Darkness. In fact, just before we were on the air, I finished one full chapter and tweaked another. It's called Betrayed, and the storyline is exactly like the title. There are a number of different ways we can view betrayal, and I think I hit most of them in this particular story, but it is a psychological thriller like the others, and it features George, Brett, and Brian.
Okay. All right. That is absolutely awesome. I mean, it's always good to have something in the works and something that's next. So Joseph, thank you. Honestly, thank you for taking time out of your busy day. It's been awesome talking with you. Absolutely wonderful interview.
Hey, thank you. I really enjoyed this, and any old time.
Okay. All right. So if you'd like to connect with more from Joseph Lewis, you can do so by visiting his website, jrlewis.blogspot.com. He is also on Facebook and Twitter. I will have links to that below this video for you to connect with more from Joseph, his books, and his social media. Until next time, keep writing. Your next bestseller is waiting to be released. I'm wishing you all the best and continued success, and I'll see you in the next video.